All right, we are recording. Welcome, everybody. This is the third or fourth officials town hall or update we've had. And Bonnie Walker is going to be helping me out a little bit today with this. I'm going to start out with a few items and let her take over. Just a couple of things for everybody. Feel free to use the chat functionality. A lot of people have been saying hello to each other, which is fine. Let's go ahead from now on and revert that back to information for everybody to sort of see or ask questions. There is a private person-to-person chat. I've left that enabled in here too if you do want to talk to someone. From personal experience, I'll tell you not to confuse the two, especially with anything embarrassing you put out there. I have left the ability for you to unmute yourself. Let's please stay muted unless we need to. We're going to open it up to some question and answer in a little bit. Through the audio function. Other than that, let's try to use the chat functionality. And for our panelists who are going to be speaking later, just make sure you should, I think, know how to go in and unmute yourself. So when the time comes, feel free to do that. So with that, we'll get started. Just going to run through the agenda. And I'm going to give a general update, an overall on a few items just with USA Cycling in general. We have three panelists who are going to talk about working in COVID, and Bonnie's going to help facilitate that. We are going to have a discussion over a project that the National Technical Commission has been working on, which is sort of a rethinking of our Officials of the Year program, and Katsu Tanda is going to cover that. And then we'll open it up for some question and answer. And again, feel free to drop a bit of chat, questions in chat. I will try to monitor that as I'm speaking, and I told Bonnie and the panelists I would help manage that as we go along. So let's start with just some general updates from my side of things. I thought it was important to give you just an idea of where we sit right now with numbers and sort of what we're looking at for next year. As we've done these, have talked about the fact that we're down. The numbers that we have held sort of through the rest of the year. These are all as of Tuesday. We're down. We have a total of 513 events year to date. It's about 25% of our normal event load, and have had just over 80,000 rider days. That is basically every time someone gets on a bicycle, whether it's a race or a rod or any of those that's through the permitting system. That's been running about 19% of normal. There is a lag on that we get the permits in when they happen. And as you all know who do your post-event reports, sometimes that's a week or two lag on getting those numbers in. So those will even up a little toward the end of the year. The recent surge in COVID has definitely seen a cancellation of several events that were planned. Some of you were possibly working events that were scheduled for November and December. And I think for very good reasons, organizers have pulled back on those, either because they are worried about the risk involved or local permitting agencies have not allowed those to move forward. And that's fine from our perspective. I keep getting asked about 2021. And if I had a crystal ball, I'd be a lot richer than I am right now. But I'll give you sort of our viewpoint of what we're hearing from the community. First, we are looking at probably a soft start to 21. I guess would be first quarter will look somewhat like what we've seen late fall and this winter. And as we all know, as with the general society, everyone's looking at a vaccine and what the timeline of that's going to be and when that's going to enable us to get back to some type of normal. What we are seeing, which is good news, is organizers want to hold bike races and people want to race bikes. We've seen an active push, and we are working with organizers to move events later in the year or look at contingency dates. I'll talk about that a little bit with the assignment process. People are anticipating, I think, what we are and looking at alternatives to move. But I think we all are hoping for a bit of a light at the end of the tunnel sometime early to mid next year. Beyond that, I'd have to be a fortune teller and can't tell you a lot. I will say we are working with the organizers on things like the permit fees and other items to try to help them out as they move forward. I want to talk a little about the assignment process. So road and track requests are in process. The deadline was last Sunday, I believe, or around that time. And we've had a few late comers who we've tried to take care of, but those are in the midst of being done now. If for some reason, and we've tried to blast this out in multiple ways, including through the local associations, if you never got your road or track assignment request form, and we use the same email we use for this, so please send a note to officials@usacycling.org and we'll see what we can do at that point. So we have a working group that's actually starting on that assignment process this week. We do give those to the event organizers to have a look at. We're going to give them a couple of days. And our anticipation is after that, we'll be able to send those out to everybody in early December. The mountain bike calendar, I've had some questions about the assignment process there. Due to a variety of good reasons, we still are working to finalize what that calendar looks like. And that should be done here shortly, and we'll get to move very quickly on those mountain bike assignments. Again, if you didn't get the request form, send that note to our general officials email. And I will just let you know, based on that rescheduling of events, if an event does move from the spring to later in the year, we will work and try to reposition that crew based on your availability to that later time frame. So don't feel like you don't necessarily want to do spring events. If they move, we are going to try to move the crew with it. Obviously, there can be personal conflicts there, but we'll do our best to get you engaged with an event. Some just general updates here. I want to talk a little about our memberships. I've received quite a few emails in the last week about renewing licenses. We did, I think it was earlier this year or earlier than that, make a decision not to let people renew until they'd completed their safe sport and background check. And that was not done in a negative way. What we didn't want was someone to renew their license and not that anybody's going to fail their background check when they do it again. But if you just hadn't accomplished those, you were out there without that in place. So I think that confused some folks who've always just been able to purchase or renew and then would deal with that later. So that's why some of you are seeing that. With all of that said, I would ask anybody, unless you're working in the next few weeks and need it, to wait until early December. We are moving finally. We had a bit of a patch this year with the officials' licenses, which caused some issues. We are finally moving on to the new next-gen platform we've been using now for a couple of years for our general memberships. And that should be on track for early December. We're not doing any pricing change for the officials memberships, and it'll be running on that same platform that we're using for general memberships, which is also going to be used for UCI International licenses. The good news is you can purchase in December and you won't expire at the end of December. Officials licenses are going to run on a 365-day basis, and that our general memberships are as well. So if you get a license January 4th, it'll be good till January 3rd the next year, and you'll have to renew it and you'll get a notification. That is not the case for international commissaires because the UCI won't let us do that. So if you're an international, January 1, that'll be good to December 31st or whenever you need it in the year. Couldn't quite talk them out of that 12/31 expiration. When this is ready, I've talked to IT yesterday. We're going to work up a pretty simple one-sheeter and send it out to everybody with some instructions on it. So hopefully this will be a pretty painless process. Just some things with general memberships or licensing. All youth and junior licenses are now free, which is awesome. We were able to make that move. It's something we want to do. So, anybody racing age 18 or under no longer has a race license fee with USA Cycling. They're able to go out and race for no charge to us. They still have to buy the bike and pay the entry fees. To help support that, we did have a slight increase in our standard and premium memberships. And as with what's happening with you all shortly, and we've talked about this before, but most memberships are now going to run 365 days. Now, what that will mean is that we can't just rely on looking at 12/31 or thinking 12/31 for standard licenses. There's going to be some renewed emphasis on looking at expiration dates for licenses, and that like Bike Reg will catch that when they do registration. The mobile app will show it's expired, and we do have I call it the field guide for the new membership products on the officials resource page. It'll walk you through all this, and we'll be updating that in December as needed to keep you up to date on those. Heidi asked the question, do juniors without licenses need 1-days? They need to go in and get a license, Heidi. That's a great question. Their full race license will be free, but they do need to have a license. I don't see why they would pay $10 for a 1-day when they can get a free annual, but they do need a license in order to race. That's a great question. Thanks.
Hey, Chuck, in addition to that, they can still buy the license or they can still fill out the form at the races, correct?
Yeah, and Bunny, that's a good question. We've actually are doing some new functionality with IT. Our goal is to have a QR code for each race for a variety of reasons. Besides not killing trees, we are trying to move away from using papered events. Mm-hmm. So what you'll be seeing in the future, if a rider needs either a 1-day or an annual license, is they can walk up with their device and take a picture of the QR code. It will pull up that application electronically and allow them to purchase it right there on site. Now, that's assuming that their cell phone signal or internet capability. So we will have paper backup. That does a few things. It takes the sales tax issue that has come about in the last year because of local laws and federal law. It takes that out of the equation for the organizer. It immediately puts them in our system, and there's no manual entry, which saves us a lot of time. We also find it's much more accurate, and it just gets them in the system and is easier to use. So that's good questions. And we've already started playing with that a little this year and are implementing that even more for next year.
Okay. And then there's one more that just came in the chat.
Yep. Now needing license till March, April, May. Rick asked, yes, we've budgeted for, I'll tell you this, Rick, most people buy their licenses in March, April, and May, so it's really not a change. That's how we budget normally. We do have auto renew for a significant portion of our race licenses in December, so that brings in some revenue in December. That's a good question. But I think we'll probably see the trends. I think maybe what you're pointing out is that the trend will be that we'll see those later because they're not needed due to no racing. And yeah, we've taken that into account for sure. So good question. A couple staff updates. Justin Evans. Justin was back with us for about a month and a half. He's actually on the call here, so you guys can say hi to him. He is back on furlough for a bit, and we're hoping to get him back early in 21. He was super helpful in getting quite a few things done, including getting our UCI teams registered. So be sure and drop Justin a note in chat directly if you want to. And Matt Wade, who's one of our event service regional managers, has normally covered the East Coast. We've been able to bring Matt back about a month ago, and he is now sort of covering the whole US as a regional manager. So you may be hearing a little bit from Matt or see some communications for him over the course of the spring. So Jeffrey, why don't you email me directly on the QR code, and the junior license thing's brand new as of a day or two ago. So I'll take a look at that. If anybody has any specific questions on their licenses, email that officials@usacycling.org, and I'll forward those to the appropriate folks. Jeff Valicia is going to send you what you need for that junior race. So trying to keep up with chat and do this. Let me go into our next slide, talk about upgrades in education, which will cover one of the chat questions I just got. First, we have a bunch of new track secretaries. I've got them all listed here, and several of them are on here I can see. I do want to really thank Noreen for stepping up and teaching that class, and sounds like it went well. For those of you who are listed here as of this morning, Valicia has got you entered in the system as track secretary, so congratulations on that. I taught the Motor C class a couple months ago. It was 2 fun nights of virtual talking about riding motorcycles. Everyone who took it passed, which was great, and you can see everyone there who's a new Motor C. And I just want to congratulate those folks and their brilliant instructor who taught them. So some stuff that's coming up here shortly. I got a question in chat about a new motor class. We're probably going to wait to the early spring, and we're finding that virtual class worked really well. I could probably teach it much quicker, and we're going to get some other instructors involved to spread the burden around. We're waiting a little bit on the to see what happens with COVID about some other classes. The NTC met. We are talking a Road A class. Justin has done some work on a new format that's more remote and virtual for the mountain bike A class. And we're talking about the possibility of a ENC road class, and then possibly work with a couple of our partners for some other ENC classes. Several of you may have also seen there was some chatter on Facebook about classes that the UCI is teaching virtually for NatCom. And the person who put that out, I love to death, but probably let it out a little early. And the UCI is about to announce that they're looking at teaching both some NatCom and sort of in-service training type classes virtually. And that'll be coming to us very shortly with information. And I'll be sure and send that out to the whole officials community so you guys are updated. But you haven't missed anything yet. And as soon as we get more concrete information, we'll be free to send it. We'll be sure and send it out to everybody. With that said, I want to open it up real quickly to any general USA Cycling Q&A on anything I've talked about, and I'll be happy. We'll address bigger questions at the end of this if needed. So I think I've kept up with chat at this point, and doesn't look like anybody has anything else. If you do, drop it in chat, and we'll address it toward the end when we have some time. And I've got a couple more items at the very end that we'll cover. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Bonnie, and I want to thank our 3 panel members who I've seen a couple of them. I haven't made sure everybody's here. If you all want to unmute yourself when Bonnie asks you. And these are all officials who have worked in the COVID era, I'll call it, and are going to share some experiences with us. So Bonnie, it is all yours, and I'm going to go on mute and help out with chat.
All right, thanks, Chuck. So we have touched on officiating during the COVID period in one of our prior webinars, but there seemed to be still a large interest in hearing about how things are going out there. So we have 3 people joining us today. Most of them you probably know. We have Mitch Beckner, and Mitch will be talking a little bit about his experience from when things first started happening and what he found at the event. Vince Kuko is going to be talking a little bit about mass start events from a road, cross, and mountain bike perspective, and also the procedures that they put in place for their mountain bike series in Arkansas. And then Sean Farrell, who's in Colorado, was instrumental in putting together some of the procedures that they have asked their race directors to follow. And so he's going to kind of go through some of that. So we've given them each about 5 minutes or so to talk, leaving a little bit of time for questions. If you have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat and we'll make sure we get them asked. And Sean, if you would, I'd like you to go ahead and start the conversation.
Thank you, Bonnie, and hi, everybody. I wasn't going to go through a lot of the specific details, mainly because I noticed that Vince put together an outline that was just superb. It pretty much covers anything that anyone would want to talk about as far as the actual processes we're going through. But one of the things I wanted to point out, my experiences anyways, is both as an official and also as a person in the LA who has been working with the political bodies in Colorado. Um, and really, that probably was the most interesting part of this year, in that we were able to really dig in and work with the public health authorities and with the governor's office directly. And if there is a upside to this whole issue, it's that we suddenly had time where we weren't putting fires out, and time to actually do some long-term plans and get our hands dirty with things that we hadn't really been able to do before. So one of the things that we did is we actually were trying to work with, like I said, the governor's office to draft the legislation along with Bicycle Colorado. And there were some critical moments in that where we went from the public health order, which pretty much was, stay at home, to, okay, now you can go out and we encourage you to do sports, but there's some really strict guidelines. And the two big moments we had were when we saw that they were allowing organized sports and club sports, team sports, and we're allowing, little kids to play soccer and have 25 on the field. And if you've ever seen little kids play soccer, they're not staying socially distanced. And yet everything else was stuck at 10. And so we started actively working with the governor's office to say, well, if you just even give us 20 or 25, we can do a lot with 25. We can't really do anything with 10 except a time trial. And we were able to get that to happen, where the next step went up to 25. And that opened the door to mass start events. Now, they weren't the normal mass start events we're used to seeing, but at least we could have mass start events. And then the other critical piece to that was we actively worked with the governor's office to establish that you didn't have to wear your face mask during the event. And that, of course, was just key to the whole thing. Now, we don't know what would have happened if you had to race with a face mask. I assume our participation would have been far worse than it ended up being. And so we were pretty happy that we were able to get in there and do that work and actually help write the laws that made mass start racing possible. Our timeline for events was, as most of yours, we had an event first weekend in March, and boom, that was it. We didn't start racing again until mid-July, and we opened with the state time trial championships, and we went over the top, making that COVID mitigation central. Every possible thing you could do, we did. And then we were opening up with criteriums. And the other thing we noticed in Colorado, I don't know if it's the same elsewhere, but in Colorado, it was so based on what county you were in, because there's sort of an overarching rule that the state published, and the number was 175. But what you did with the 175 varied by state or by county. Some places, the 175 was the whole day, the venue couldn't have more than 175 people. And in other counties, it was, you could have a field of 175 if you wanted, and everything in between. So we learned very quickly that where you put the race on was going to determine what sort of parameters we could establish. And so that was very interesting. I would say the other great part of it, like say, if I can extract a silver lining from it, it allowed a lot of us to do things we've gotten kind of complacent about. We've been running on autopilot for so long. The race directors did their thing, the officials did their thing, BRAC did its thing. And for the first time, we really needed to huddle up and go, okay, how are we going to make this work? And it involved all of us working together to figure out, how are we going to make this race actually function? I mean, down to real simple things. Am I allowed to share my screen or?
Sure. Chuck has that functionality enabled.
Trying to do screen share. It says I can't because someone else is sharing. So that's probably Chuck's slide.
Presentation. Is it something that we could send out or make available?
That's all right. It's all right. I can just describe it. So for when we got to cross season, we were going to be doing it in an area where we had more significant limits, and so it involved the race director and BRAC and the county all talking about how can we make this work. And so we are actually involved in things that we normally weren't involved in. The officials are involved in helping with the setup. BRAC's involved with helping with the setup and helping with course design. And so we actually created a cyclocross course with 2 separate courses intertwined with different color tape, and created different color signs and everything, and all these things that we normally don't think about. And I think that my takeaway was it really gave me an appreciation for what your average race director goes through to put on a bike race, things that I'd forgotten about, just simple things like what signs do I have to buy? Now we have to buy new signs that we've never had to worry about before. How do we have to design the course to have a maximum of 25 people on the course and yet allow enough people to ride? So we created 2 courses that looked like a crazy pinwheel of U-turns and loops and everything, all intertwining with each other, of course, not crossing each other. And so I thought that, the one thing we all got out of it is we at BRAC learned more about what the race directors needed to go through. We all learned what it took to get laws passed. The riders learned what was going on to make races possible. And I would say that the other best part of this whole season was the attitude of the riders was completely different than we've ever seen before. I mean, everyone was so grateful just to have a bike race. Those that came out, I mean, there's still a significant portion of our ridership thinks we shouldn't have been doing this all season. And they were fairly vocal about telling us that. But those that did want to participate were so grateful that we pulled this off that we got almost no lip from anybody about wearing face masks. I spent 1 race being the face mask Nazi, and that was the only race I had to do that. From that point on, they parked where they were supposed to park. They didn't show up early. They did leave early. They wore their face masks all the time. And it just worked real well because they were just thrilled. And I've never gotten so many thank yous from riders. It really was a fun experience to kind of go back to your community-based local racing scene where everyone was pulling together just for the benefit of the sport. And so if there was a good part about that, I mean, that was it, for me anyway. And the officials all pitched in and worked under weird circumstances that they had to adapt to, and everyone had to adapt. And it was kind of fun in a way. It was too bad we had to do it, but we did it. And I think everyone involved was very proud of the fact that we managed to have a real season. We had a road season and we had a cross season, and a lot of riders came and everyone had fun. So.
Great.
Sean, I assume you wanted to share your BRAC guidelines. I put a link to those in chat. Found them on the web real quick, quicker than I could let you screen share. So,
okay.
For anybody's interested, BRAC took the state guidelines along with our guidelines and created basically BRAC bike race guidelines for the state of Colorado. So.
And we're going to be revising those to cut out a lot of the sort of the political background info and just make it more nuts and bolts. You're a race director, you want to do X, here's how you do it, at least as long as COVID is in effect. So we'll be updating that fairly soon.
Great. Thank you, Sean. Appreciate it. Vince, since Sean gave you kudos on your outline, we're going to switch over to you next.
Kudos equals more pressure.
Well, you dressed the part, so.
Only because our CR of CRs, Chuck, forgot to tell us what the dress code was. I am not wearing khaki pants. I will admit it's flannel pajama bottoms. I'm doing the business casual mullet. Business up top and party down below. Basically, we didn't see a whole lot of change in the region I work, which is Oklahoma, Arkansas, and parts of Missouri. In Arkansas specifically, we basically just began discussions with our promoters much earlier, asked the promoters to provide us information from each of the permitting agencies, so your state, county, city, landowner, and how they are meeting those guidelines and what their requirements are. And we wanted proof of that to discuss with them. We did do spacing in our mass start events, so grids. We just put up starting grids and made sure that they were 6 feet apart so we could maintain social distance. We did require our participants to wear masks until they were called into that grid. So at registration and wandering around the beginning. Something else we did, which for Arkansas was brand new, is we required pre-registration only. That reduced the amount of congregating of people at a start line at the table, filling out their release forms and whatnot. So did want to call out thanks to USA Cycling and collaborating with Bike Reg, because the riders found that process to be much, much smoother than the old way of doing it, even with pre-reg. We got a lot of compliments on that, actually. Our officials all wore PPE, face masks at a minimum, some wore face shields. And on the road, really nothing changed. We did put, sorry, I just had a brain fart. We did it on our results, tried to email those out. So we were doing electronic results whenever possible. Within our mountain bike series, we did electronic results on all but one race where they just didn't have the capacity to do that. And when we were doing the electronic results, we did mandate that the protest period be extended to 30 minutes to allow riders more time to review those results if their Wi-Fi or their phones were sketchy. Where they could not be done electronically, we printed multiple copies, had them spaced out so people could see them in multiple locations and reduce the cluttering around results. In mountain biking on our side, the series supplied all of our promoters with PPE. We did 2 to 3 gallons of hand sanitizer at each event, provided 400 pairs of nitrile gloves and 400 face masks. So nobody had an excuse not to wear the face masks. Promoters also did health screenings and temperature checks. So anybody with 100.4 degree fever who'd lasted more than 2 days or traveled or been exposed to someone with COVID, they just weren't allowed to enter the sites. We were lucky in that aspect only because every mountain bike race had a gate we had to get through at the land site. Let's see, I'm going through my outline real quickly. Yeah, that was pretty much it. So not a real big change, since we typically communicate with promoters before an event. And the big change that we did see was a positive, and that was the pre-registration only. That had been a hurdle we've been trying to get over for years. That is completely over. People are enjoying it.
Okay. So a couple of questions for you, Vince.
Mm-hmm.
Did you find did it fall more on the official's shoulders or the race director to ensure that riders and our spectators were following the protocols that you guys expected? How was that handled?
The promoters typically did that.
Okay, and there was no issues? I mean, everybody was pretty agreeable?
Never had a single complaint. I think, like Sean was mentioning, people were just happy to be able to get out of the house and go race.
Okay. And then from the starting grid perspective, how did you ensure like fair starts? Did you run neutral for a little while to allow everybody to kind of get position, or how did you handle who was in what box to stage?
So with the mountain bike series, it was based on your series points. And then if you weren't, didn't have any series points, it was who signed up first on pre-reg.
Okay.
And then you typically had a 200-meter hole shot at least, sometimes more. Same with cross. Road was a stage race that we did in Oklahoma with the collegiate group. And again, that was done on points.
Okay. So we had a question come in. Sean or Vince, either one of you, have you ever had the situation? And if you did, how was it handled with riders perhaps spitting during the race, clearing their nose, anything like that? Were there discussions prior to the start on how that should be handled?
From my aspect, honestly, I forgot completely about that. Didn't even consider it.
Okay, Sean, anything on your side of what you've had?
Yeah, we actually discussed it probably at the first two mass start events. I mean, it kind of was a point of, humor with each pack, no blowing snot rockets. And from that point, it very quickly just became a self-policing thing, and nobody was going to dare, because everyone knew that we were walking a tightrope and anything could send us spiraling the wrong direction. So the riders enforced it themselves, and we really didn't hear of it ever again after the first two races.
Okay. Yeah, and Mitch actually spoke up to me in chat, and he said it was, oh, sorry, that was for a question I was asking him. Okay. Great. Well, thank you, Vince. I appreciate that. So we're going to turn it over to Mitch to talk a little bit about his working during the pandemic. And this was about mid-July when things were just starting to open up. And I believe he was probably one of the early officials that was out in the field at that time. So Mitch, if you'd like to share some of your experiences.
Sure. Yeah, it was mid-July. The race was scheduled for July 17th. I'm not sure how familiar everyone is with politics in the Midwest at that time, but it was a little bit of a charged situation. Leading up to the race, there was a lot of talk on social media. There was pretty good division between the riders who thought it was a terrible idea to have this race and those who wanted to participate. The race director, this is a race, one of the bigger races with one of the bigger prize lists in the area. I had worked it at least 2 or 3 times before. The race director was adamant about wanting to put on a mass start crit and to have it be just a normal crit. So that was his approach going in. USAC had just recently started to put out their guidelines on that. So going back to a lot of what Sean and Vince both talked about, was one of the big things for me was just communication. I started working with Stuart. It was probably at least a month ahead of the race, to talk to him about the validity of the permit. We wanted to make sure the insurance was good. At that point, that was still somewhat of a question. We wanted to make sure we were following all the guidelines of the state, the county, the city, the local health department. So there was a lot of Zoom meetings with race directors, a lot of emails going back and forth between Stuart and myself. And the race director, just to make sure that we had all the basics in place there. Now, in hindsight, one of the things I would recommend for anybody who's CR or an assigner for a situation like this is to have a backup plan as far as your officiating crew. We had a 4-person crew assigned early on, but in the last week, 2 of the officials that were assigned to the crew had to back out because close contacts of theirs had tested positive. So the last week, I'm scrambling around. Ken Hart was helping me as well. We're trying to find officials to fill in. Actually, Jerome McNear also, he played a big role in getting some people lined up. And so we ended up getting a crew together. But there was a lot of communication going on. Stuart and Chuck had sent some some guidelines of things to send out to the crew. I made sure the crew was well aware of if they were not comfortable working, it was okay to decline. If they were in a high-risk group, or if they had not been symptom-free, or if they had close contacts who tested positive, make sure they knew it was okay to back out and to let me know as soon as possible so that we could get things covered. When it came down to the actual race, they had 390 pre-registered riders, and they actually had 264 unique riders show up. So that was kind of a surprise that that many people did show up. We did some of the same things Vince mentioned. We had no day of pre-registration, contactless packet pickup. I was pleasantly surprised at the effort the race organization and their staff put into it. There were hand sanitizing stations everywhere, signage about wearing masks and social distancing. We staged in a grid, a 6-foot separated grid. And we did do we staged in order of registration. We did a neutral rollout lap where the riders were told that we had a pace car. The pace car was instructed to go very slowly, and the riders were told that they were allowed to change positions if they wanted to, and then the racing would begin at the end of the first neutral lap. And that actually worked out pretty well. Let's see, what else did we do? We did not post any results. We created a Google Sheet and posted the link to the Google Sheet at various locations around the venue so that the riders knew where to look to see the results. We only accepted protests for podium places and payout places, and those were handled by text message. Any protests about the results for lower places were emailed, and we dealt with those in the 48 hours after the race. All that information was posted in various places around the venue, and surprisingly, that actually worked pretty well. Let's see, what else was I gonna say? Yeah, just like Sean said, despite all the social media chatter ahead of time, the feedback from the riders and really the organization staff and everybody, it was all very positive. Everybody was excited to be racing again. Their skill level was surprisingly good. I was afraid we were going to have, I was particularly concerned about the wheel pit, because to me, that seemed like one of the areas where there was going to be a potential for a lot of exposure if there were mass crashes and things. But surprisingly enough, we only had one occurrence report, very few crashes. Everything went fairly smoothly. I made sure that my pit referee wore gloves and a mask at all times. I wore a face shield, which worked out pretty well because with the clear face shield, I was a little bit better able to communicate. People could see what I was saying as opposed to having the mask on. I did early in the race, blew my whistle with my face shield down. That's not something you want to do. Took about 10 minutes to get my hearing back. But the judges At the time, I should say that Indiana and Lawrenceburg had no mask mandate at all. So we weren't telling people that they had to wear masks. So I had sent out information strongly recommending that, that everybody wear masks, including the officials. The judges found that they chose not to, but we had enough space on the stage. They were able to spread out. The announcer and our two judges were able to maintain social distancing. So that worked out okay. And really, honestly, never heard anything negative about the event after it happened. I think that's about everything I was gonna cover.
Okay. So just
the woman who won the women's open race, which was a 1, 2, 3, 4 race, Andrea Sear, actually wore a mask the entire time and won the race. She was the only rider who wore a mask during the race, and she won. So can be done.
Okay, and thank you, Mitch. One of the questions that came in, and it sounds like all three of you, in your experience, that the riders, when they were competing, were not required to wear a mask. But one of the questions came in for those where masks were required even when competing. How do we manage that as an official? I believe we've talked about that probably in our earlier webinar where we touched base on this. And it's kind of self-policing at that point. I think the conversation was the other riders were calling the riders that were not conforming to the masks about wearing their masks or taking their masks down. But I think it kind of self-policed and corrected itself. And Chuck, do you recall that conversation, or do you have anything else to add on that?
Yeah, Bonnie, it was 2 webinars ago. And if you all look on the officials resources page, the guidance we put out for officials, our recommendation is to treat it like the helmet rule, that if it's required by a jurisdiction or an organizer to be worn during the race, that's a special regulation. We actually did relegate and DQ the race in Pennsylvania, which is probably the one that's come about. We've not seen that requirement very much in events. It seems like it's either you have the event without them, or you don't have the event kind of thing. So that was, I think, a relatively unique circumstance. But that is in that guidance we put out to you all. And I'll drop the link here in just a minute into chat for everyone, so you have that. Also, just Mitch mentioned we did go to a requirement for officials to wear masks when working, unless they were very socially distant. So that would be, if you're up in the stands at a velodrome 200 feet away from everybody, there's no requirement there. But I think he did this event before we made that mandate, as I recall. So that is in the documentation that I'll drop in the chat here in a minute. And I do want to thank all 3 of you for Vince. We didn't talk much during the season, but it sounds like things went well. I think Mitch and I were talking every day, and Stuart Lamp from our department, as well as Sean. So we were definitely in communication on these events as they happen. But thanks to all of you for working these, and also sharing your wisdom. And hopefully we're at a point next year where we look back at these videos and realize it's the past.
Yeah, fingers crossed. Okay, yeah, I appreciate it, Mitch, Sean, and Vince. Thank you very much. So now we will move on to the Official of the Year program. As Chuck mentioned earlier, we had a group that got together to kind of rethink how we wanted to rework this program. Katsu Tanda was on that committee and has graciously agreed to kind of present the highlights of what the new program entails. So Katsu.
Hold on, my video's not working, but can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I was asked to join this subcommittee to recognize officials throughout the country. Basically, we wanted to, a lot of this is, sometimes thankless, and we wanted to show our appreciation to all the officials around the country. And we came up with the Official of the Year Awards. This document should be up on the website now or soon. And you can read all of it in full as it is pulled up right now. So basically we're gonna have 3 different levels of awards named the Golden Stopwatch, the Silver Stopwatch, and the Bronze Stopwatch, which would be the honorable mention. Basically any official in good standing will be eligible for the nomination. And as far as the process, you know, typical of any other nomination process, we'll send out a call for nominations, and we'll make some nominations for the Official of the Year. And then a subcommittee will, after the period of nomination has passed, subcommittee will go through these nominations and determine the winner of each of the categories. If you scroll down a little bit to the evaluation criteria, the main difference between the Golden and Silver Stopwatch, the Golden Stopwatch would be more for officials with 5 or more years of experience. And then the Silver Stopwatch, newer officials, less than 7 years. Both of these won't have a rank requirement. And we're basically looking for officials that go above and beyond just doing officials work. You know, we're looking for, you know, individuals, you know, they are looked up upon in the cycling community. They're doing things beyond just officiating, essentially people that are trying to better the sport, as you can see in the 4 bullet points for the Golden Stopwatch. And for the Silver Stopwatch, the first 4 points are the same. And then we added a 5th point. You know, these are for the newer officials. We know we wanted to be able to give an award to both, you know, veterans and people, newcomers. And, you know, for the Silver Stopwatch, we're looking at people the newer officials that are, you know, actively looking to better themselves and better, you know, just be a better official. And, you know, as we all know, officials are in short numbers, and, you know, we want to encourage people to continue to pursue being officials and grow the sport. And the Bronze Stopwatch, we were take the pool of the remaining people and give a runner-up on the award. And if we scroll to the next page, once we make the decision of the officials of the award, official of the year, we would you know, make a typical announcement on our web platforms and properties to you know, give the announcement, and along with, you know, through our webinars, and you know, we'll be awarded with a, you know, waived license fee for the next year, a voucher to the store, and a plaque showing your achievement. And yeah, it's about the gist of the Officials of the Year program. And it's been an honor to be a part of this group to put together something to really reward all the hard work that everyone's been doing.
Yeah, and Chuck, for those of you who haven't seen it, he actually put a link in the chat for the officials resource page, which has this as well as the COVID-19 principles or guidelines. So he's showing it right now. And while he's doing that, I'd like to, well, thank you, Katsu, for presenting. I'd also like to acknowledge We had 2 other members that weren't on the NTC that actually helped with this program, and that was Ryan Fu and Trish Black. So wanted to acknowledge them publicly and thank them for their time in helping us pull this together. All right, Chuck, I think that's it. We can turn it back to you.
Great, we're about wrapped up for everyone. I did have a couple of things that came up in chat and a couple last minute. I do want to say, if everybody remembers, excuse me, we had the various task force going, and some things that came up we're not able to quite act on yet, but we are on others, and this official of the year is one that came out of the community task force. So just to let everybody know that those of you who contributed to that, that was very valuable. And even with some reduced bandwidth right now, we're still trying to act on those various items, and we'll continue to do so as we get the ability to. I had a couple questions about the assignment process, and I just want to go a little more in depth. There's a couple things I should have covered. Everyone, again, should have gotten that email. If you didn't, send the email to officials at usacycling.org. That took you to a form, online form to fill out, and our working group takes that to make the assignments. Once those are done, you will receive an email with those assignments, and we will basically let everybody know the process is closed out. So we have a lot of officials, not a lot of assignments, so someone unfortunately is going to miss out on getting something. But we'll let everybody know. We will also publish those. If you notice on the resource page, we usually have the assignments published there. Wipe those out because COVID wiped them out this year. And there's just a note there saying we'll publish shortly. So as we develop those for the various disciplines, we'll get those updated, and everybody will be able to see what everybody got. And that's just a bit of transparency on our part. I think the last thing I wanted to cover, and if you have any questions, feel free again to put them into chat before we finish up. We've had some discussion. We have had an official summit every 2 years. We've done it in person in Colorado Springs, and that obviously is going to be problematic to do in January or February of this year. We've been sort of struggling with what to do, and we had a very successful coaching summit run last month with almost 700 participants. So I am inclined to not put this off another year and go ahead and put something together in January. What I'll tell you is, as I mentioned, and I'm not crying about it, but our bandwidth is very diminished in the office right now. And I could really use some help from the community to put this on. The NTC, the technical commission, has been super helpful on all these different things everybody's seeing here and assisting us with it. If you have interest in getting involved in putting a summit on, we'll do all the hard work as far as getting Zoom set up and sending out invitations and that kind of stuff. But if you have some interest in it, I know we have some Northeastern officials who've run a really good Northeastern summit. I'd love to hear from you. And again, drop a note to the officials at usacycling.org. Let me know you're interested. We're not promising to hold it, but if we can pull something together that's meaningful for the community and helpful for everybody, we are definitely dedicated to looking at doing it. My thought would be probably mid to late January, which is when we traditionally had the in-person, and move on from there. So it doesn't look like we have any chat questions, and I appreciate the feedback everybody's given. And we are 1 minute early from our 4 o'clock Mountain Time finish, so kept it right on time. Appreciate everybody's information and willingness to participate, and now I'm looking forward to going to the officials' mailbox and seeing how many emails I got during the webinar. So
me too.
With that said, look forward to seeing everybody next time. We will send out some information on next webinar and or some type of summit. We've been trying to go every 6 to 8 weeks, so that's probably going to be our protocol. Appreciate it, and look forward to seeing everybody next time. Thanks.
Thanks, Chuck.